Naomi Klein.
Hi.
Thank you for accepting this interview. Vous êtes journaliste, essayiste et réalisatrice. Vos livres sont devenus des références critiques. Nos logos, la stratégie du choc, jusqu'à Tout peut changer, sur le système capitaliste, ses mécanismes et ses conséquences sociales et environnementales. Dans ce dernier nouvel ouvrage, Dire non ne suffit plus, la stratégie du choc Trump, écrit cette fois-ci en quelques mois, vous avez décidé cette fois-ci de parler du phénomène Donald Trump. On va en parler précisément, mais tout d'abord une première question, c'est quoi votre regard, Naomi Klein? So before diving into your book, a more general question we ask all of our guests, based on the name of the magazine Regard, which means view or outlook in English. What is your outlook on the world?
I think I look at the world at the moment through a lens of urgency and possibility. This is a moment where so many crises are coming to a head, and we don't have a lot of time. Ecologically, we're up against the wall. From a humanitarian perspective, there is no time to waste. But I also believe that in responding, we can do tremendous things to make things better. So yeah.
So you said that we are running out of time, and this book was actually written in short, like compared to the other books.
Yeah.
Why was it necessary to take a stand so quickly?
I think I sort of felt like history was slipping away in the way the culture was metabolizing Trump in this moment that we were in, where this extreme figure ascended to the most powerful post in the world. And he kept being treated like this aberration. And I felt like it was so dangerous to treat him like he was coming from nowhere, like a rupture in the culture, that he had to be understood as a culmination, as a conclusion of so many pre-existing trends, or else the way we would respond to him would just be all wrong. So yeah, I wrote the book in a hurry, in a completely different way than I usually write, just with such a sense of that there wasn't a moment to lose before getting the book out.
So, as you were saying, like for a lot of people, his election left many in a state of shock. But your book is presenting it more like, it's just what you were saying, like a logical consequence of a more global phenomenon. So what is he the consequence of?
Yeah, I mean, many things.
Yeah.
It's almost like you could identify any dangerous trend and you could see the way Trump is this amazingly exaggerated caricature version of it, you know? We have a society that is really built on a conception of power that is all about dominance over people, over the planet, that concentrates so much power in the hands of just a few people. And Trump's whole brand, everything he's been selling for decades, is all about living the dream of being so rich that you can do whatever you want to whomever you want. So we think about the way impunity is playing out in our culture right now for, powerful men to sexually abuse women, for rich individuals to have their own parallel legal structure where they get to avoid paying taxes because they're stowing their money away all around the world. There is this seemingly like this whole parallel legal structure if you're rich enough, That's what Trump represents. That's the dream he's always sold. In his reality TV shows, in his books, it's all about like, I'll teach you how to be so rich that you don't have to play by the rules either. He's a culmination of this whole idea that the billionaires are going to save us, that everything can be solved by the market. I mean, here's this guy who said, vote for me just because I'm rich. He had no experience in government. His entire pitch to voters was, because I know how to make a lot of money, you can trust me to run the government, So it's just this exaggerated, crude version of the whole economic project that has ruled the globe. And I think that makes, liberal elites in countries like France feel very uncomfortable because, that same economic agenda is pursued in France, but with a great deal more sophistication, cosmopolitanism, manners. And I think Trump's very embarrassing because he just takes the mask off and says, it's just all about money, you know. He goes around the world, he's just basically a traveling weapons salesman, you know. I mean, what isn't he the culmination of? He's a culmination of our fractured attention span, our inability to think of the future, to be, you know, the fact that we're increasingly living in this perpetual present, our addiction to Twitter. I mean, it's sort of all of it.
So you're also describing the rapidity with which he and his government have been trying to pass laws.
Yeah.
And in France today, we are also facing a lot of measures on social workers, minorities' rights. Do you think it is possible to compare both of our countries? And I know that you make the comparison at some point between Marine Le Pen and Donald Trump that have been actually often compared. But don't you think like the election of Emmanuel Macron embodies another aspect of neoliberalism, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that Trump deployed these nationalist economic arguments and even some elements of Keynesian economics in order to win the election, right? I mean, he promised to protect people's health care, their social security, to bring back the jobs. And he actually said, you know, I'm so rich that I am not in the pocket of industry. I'm going to use my wealth now to stand up for working people. Whereas all these other politicians are so corrupt, they are constantly having to go to corporations for money, so you can't trust them. So, you know, in the book I call this a corporate coup because the way he is governed is exactly the opposite. You know, he has made good on his promises to attack Mexicans, you know, and the parts of his platform that were overtly racist, he has continued with. He's tried to ban people from Muslim countries from entering the United States. But when it comes to the economic program, Trump has done the exact opposite. You know, this is the most corporate government in history. He has opened up his administration to Goldman Sachs in a way that has never happened before. I mean, Goldman Sachs has always had influence over the US government since they've been around. But Trump appointed 5 former Goldman Sachs executives to run his economic policy. That is unprecedented. You know, the fossil fuel sector is making his energy policy. He has just outsourced every one of his departments to the largest industries that benefit from them. So it is the exact opposite of how he promised to govern. His tax policy is all about enriching elites. But the truth is, if you look at his tax policy, it's not very different from Emmanuel Macron's, you know. I mean, and I do think that the way Macron has been governing on the economic front, you know, when it comes to trade policy, when it comes to attacks on labor standards, when it comes to this, you know, elimination of the wealth tax, and when it comes to austerity policies, it's a kind of a shock therapy. He's doing things very, very quickly, and people are very destabilized. And that, you know, that's a particular strategy to just go in strong, use whatever capital you've amassed after winning an election to just try to do the most unpopular things you can do in the earliest part of your administration and hope that you recover before the next election. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous in a country where we know that there is this, you know, symbiotic relationship between neoliberal economics and the rise of the far right. It's, you know, the more of these punishing economic policies are introduced, the more trade agreements are signed that erode democracy, the more figures like Marine Le Pen capitalizes on this, right? You know, so I think Trump is a sort of a strange combination, actually, of Macron's economic agenda and Marine Le Pen's, you know, social agenda.
And basically, Trudeau is, in that way, a lot like Macron, in the way in the policies that he passes or trying to, like, how do you analyze like Trudeau's current agenda? You know, Trudeau, I mean, the big challenge with the Trump era on the international stage is that Trump is so obscene. You know, he's lowered the bar so much.
for what a politician can say and do, that basically anybody looks good in comparison to Trump, right? So it's possible for figures like Macron and Trudeau to look like superheroes, you know, progressive superheroes. I mean, Trudeau even dressed as Superman for Halloween, based on next to nothing, you know, based on very symbolic actions, sending out a meme about how you're going to save the planet, sending out, you know, a tweet about how you're going to stand up for refugees. And of course, the policies aren't there to back it up, you know. But people are so hungry for, you know, hope in the midst of this very frightening moment, that they are like dangerously turning figures like Trudeau into rock stars, and not demanding nearly enough of them. I mean, we really do need leaders who are an anti-Trump, but we have to demand more of them before they get to play that role, you know. And so Trudeau is, you know, he's done some good things, but you know, he likes to position himself as a leader on climate change, and he has been pushing to build several new pipelines carrying oil from the Alberta tar sands, which represents a major expansion of production of some of the dirtiest, highest carbon oil on the planet. And you know, he has said some great things about refugees, and that's important. You know, we do need to send out a very different message, a very different narrative about refugees, and at this time when, you know, there's just such a cruel response to desperate human need. So I'm happy that I have a prime minister who says refugees are welcome. I'm not happy that I have a prime minister who will not repeal a law that bars refugees or any immigrants from coming from the United States into Canada. You know, we have an agreement with the United States that once you try to gain access to the United States, you can't then come to Canada. So, you know, basically Trudeau is saying, come to Canada, but he's leaving up this wall, and so people are having to walk across the border in the middle of winter, you know, getting frostbite, losing toes because they just can't cross legally. So there's you know, an incredible double discourse going on.
So I'd like also to talk, so it's something that we just evoked, about the anti-ecology policies of the Trump's government. So nowadays, like the different COPs, the latest UN reports are stating the urgency of taking real action to limit the consequences of climate change. And as you were saying, like Emmanuel Macron or Trudeau are the first to recognize it. But many governments, despite the fact that their measures are far from answering the problems, are like recognizing these emergencies. But Trump, on the contrary, and the members of his government decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement and are standing firmly as climate deniers. So why would they go to, like, why denying?
Well, I think there's something very profound going on with Trump's relationship to truth, Trump's whole relationship to reality, and climate change denial is only one part of it. I mean, the argument I make, you know, is that to understand Trump, you have to understand his brand, and what his brand really is. This thing that he has been selling, you know, through all of these different commercial enterprises over the years, is an idea about power. It's an idea about if you are rich enough, you can do whatever to whoever you want. You know, this is what he said on that famous Access Hollywood tape about women. You know, you can grab them by the pussy, they'll let you do it if you're famous enough, you know. And he said on the campaign, you know, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, right? If you look at his reality TV show, The Apprentice, you know, the whole thing is just one long advertisement for absolute power through wealth. You're fired, you're hired, you know, I mean, and so people are vicariously living this dream. I believe that for Trump, denying physical reality is like the ultimate expression of power. Like, he does not believe that he should be constrained by physical laws. I don't think he really doesn't believe climate change is happening. I just think that he doesn't care. He believes that his wealth and the wealth of his the people around him will insulate them from the worst impacts of climate change. They care about themselves and their kids, and beyond that, they're not too concerned. And so climate science is very inconvenient for them. It's very inconvenient for them because it means that their ability to amass wealth is dramatically curtailed. It slams up against their entire economic agenda, right? I mean, if climate change is real, you can't be giving a huge tax cut to corporations. We need money to spend on public transit, to spend on renewable energy, to spend on this huge economic transition that we need to make. In order to protect this worldview, which is all about deregulation, all about privatization, all about their own tax cuts, they can't allow the reality of climate change to exist. It's inconvenient, it's unprofitable, and as an expression of their absolute power, they're just choosing to deny reality. But it's not like a serious position. Like, I don't think we should give it that credence. They are exercising their power, you know. In my book, I quote somebody in the Trump administration. It's an anonymous quote, but he says that within the Trump administration, they compete over who can get the most lies into newspapers. They're constantly leaking lies as a game. Like, it's actually fun to see how many lies they can get into print, because it shows their power. Like, they're making their own reality. And what's more powerful than that?
So,
I mean, it's like a reality TV show, right? Like, that's what reality TV shows do. That's why it's significant that Trump comes from the world of reality TV, because reality TV is a world where you treat events, like actual events, as raw material to construct your own reality.
So in this basically world of fake news, how do you decide to resist? Because it's also a big element of the book. It's like saying no, resisting, and like trying to win with another view of the world. So maybe I'd like to focus a bit more on maybe the alternatives that are available currently. So,
but I mean, before we do that, I mean, I do think it's important to understand that this refrain of fake news, I mean, it adds this whole other layer to this exercise of power, because to constantly lie in the way that Trump lies, and then to follow that up by accusing everybody who is trying to tell the truth as being part of fake news, right? So to completely flip the tables. I mean, that's the ultimate, that expression of, I can do anything. I am making reality. I'm king.
But there seems to me like there's also a problem of basically the opposition parties in front of it that are still struggling, and especially the left, to find a correct voice to address that new system, basically. So maybe, like you are saying in your book, that we need to go beyond the no to offer a real alternative. And like, for example, is the recent rise of Jeremy Corbyn in England one example of like this positive dynamic creating a new discourse, for example?
I think it is, and the way in which most of the Democratic Party has been trying to take on Trump, it's still treating him as if he's playing by rules that he long ago rejected, right? And as if you're going to sort of catch him lying, and somehow that's going to change people's minds. When Trump's base is entirely defended against that. The only place where he's vulnerable is on the economic side, and there's just this relentless focus on Russia and sort of proving that Trump is like a foreign agent, which is, something else that I think is a very reassuring narrative, because, if Trump is a foreign agent, then Americans don't have to take responsibility for the fact that their own culture produced him, the political culture, the media culture, he's made in America, like, even though none of his products are made in America, like, he was made in America. So I think there's a sort of a desperation about casting him as foreign, as this whole phenomenon being something that was orchestrated by Putin. But he is vulnerable. He is vulnerable because of the broken promises on economics. I mean, he's doing the exact opposite of what he promised to do, and there's very little focus on that, because compared to the palace intrigue, the drama around Trump, all that economic stuff is very boring, right? It doesn't get the same ratings, and so it hasn't received nearly the attention that it should. With Corbyn, I think what we've seen is that it is still possible in this time when it seems that politics has been taken over by showmanship, by marketing. It is still possible to lead with ideas. To me, it's so striking that Corbyn was able to so dramatically change his political fortunes and change the narrative of this campaign. This was an election that didn't have to happen, that was called by Theresa May only because she saw the polls and was convinced she was going to be able to wipe Labour out for a generation. And what changed during the campaign and what denied the Tories their majority and what ultimately led Labour to win more votes than in any election since the Second World War. Not enough to win, but if there was an election called tomorrow, it looks like they would win. What changed was not that Jeremy Corbyn suddenly became a charismatic politician, he became a different person. He didn't. He's the same person he's always been. But he came out with this manifesto about a different kind of Britain, a different kind of society that was much more humane, that met people's urgent needs for healthcare, for education, for jobs, that had a bold plan on climate change, that was hopeful, but that was willing to go where the money is and confront power. And people read it and they liked it. So to me, that really is about the power of an affirmative vision, a hopeful vision, but most importantly, a vision that addresses where the anger is coming from. The anger that is fueling the rise of people like Trump or Le Pen. Like, there's real anger there. There is a real disaffection with the system. And it is possible to speak to that anger and that disaffection in a way that is internationalist, that doesn't pit people against each other based on race and religion and immigration status, and that has credible solutions.
So there is a part actually in your book with a manifesto, one that you have been contributing to. Could you tell us a bit more about this one?
Yeah, so the final chapter in the book is about a project that I've been involved in for a couple of years now called the Elite Manifesto. That is a people's platform. It's a platform that was written not by a political party, but by a coalition of leaders, organizations from different movements: labor, climate, food justice, migration, indigenous rights, racial justice, feminism, where we were part of this kind of dreaming process where we came together over a period of a few days and insisted that we weren't going to spend the time diagnosing problems, that we know we're good at this, we know how to do this, we know everything is messed up, we've got lots of experiences coming together to say no, but we have very little experience coming together to say, okay, what does the world look like after we win? What do we actually want, and how can we get there in a way that doesn't create like a list of policies that we want, but actually is really about a paradigm shift from a society based on really treating the earth and treating people, particularly marginalized people, as garbage, as disposable, treating workers and the earth as if we can extract from them without limit, as if there's no limit to how much we can push and take, and to a system that is based on caretaking, that is based on, yes, we have to take, but we also have to repair the damage. We have to take care of each other. We have to take care of the planet. So it's a vision that is very much informed by Indigenous knowledge. There were a lot of Indigenous elders that were part of drafting that, and part of helping that meeting stay on course. And so I included that as an example of the kind of organizing from below I think that needs to happen, because there's a lot of waiting for politicians to lead us. There's a lot of sort of kind of, well, who's the next charismatic figure who's going to tell us what the plan is, and then there's a lot of unhappiness when we don't like how those charismatic figures act, I think social movements more and more have their yeses, are not just, I think the climate movement more and more knows that we can't just be against pipelines. We have to have a plan for not just renewable energy, but energy democracy, energy justice, community-controlled renewable energy, 100% renewable energy for the 100%. The movement for Black Lives that has been, fighting police violence has worked very hard to come up with a vision, a forward-looking vision for Black lives that deals with mass incarceration, that deals with an unjust education system, an unjust tax system. But one of the problems we have is that even when our individual issues have solutions, we're still very much divided. And I think this is very much the legacy of neoliberalism of, we tend to think, in a way that is very compartmentalized: education over here, health over here, labor over here, climate over here. And so even when we come up with our solutions, we aren't actually able to communicate to the public a vision of a different world, a holistic vision. This is what it looks like, this is what it feels like. And I think that one of the problems we had after the 2008 financial crisis is that even though we were very good at rejecting, at saying no to austerity and to this very unjust response to crisis, because we too often did not have a vision for a way out of crisis, a plan for a way out of crisis that was confident and credible and captivating for people, that would really solve multiple problems of unemployment, inequality, ecological collapse. I mean, we've got a lot of problems, and because it was mostly a moment of rejection, I think the public was afraid that if they said no, they would end up with something even worse. Because this is what we've all been told now for 40 years of neoliberalism, is that there is no alternative to neoliberalism except apocalypse. So even when people know that something is extremely unjust, like having, a crisis created by the banks paid for by pensioners and students and working people, there was still this fear of the unknown, And that's why I think we can't be afraid to map the world that we want and to try to build it in miniature, and maybe in towns and cities. And I think we're starting to see more of that with the rise of radical municipalism and more and more movements are starting to bridge into politics at the local level. We see this with Barcelona en Común, the Ada Colau's party and her candidacy going from being a housing rights activist resisting evictions to being the mayor of Barcelona and beginning to redesign a city in a way that welcomes refugees, that is for pedestrians and cyclists and less for cars, and is based on solidarity and so I think it is starting to happen, and that is important. It isn't enough for us to do the work locally. I think we need solutions at every level. But when people can experience another way of living close to home, I think it begins to get us past this crisis of imagination, which is the greatest success of neoliberalism, is the colonization of our imaginations.
So it's going probably to resonate with one of the last questions that has been asked by the former guests. So she's saying, Dear Naomi Klein, more than anyone, you've described the empire of consumerism and the underlying mechanisms of brands to reconquer democracy. Do you think we need also on an individual level practice to practice degrowth, even if you don't like the word?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think that we need to look inside ourselves and ask ourselves what we are shopping for. What are we shopping for something we actually need, or are we shopping because we're anxious because we are afraid of something, because we, are trying to fill some other void. And even, I think we even have to look for our own, inner, like in the book I say we have to find our inner Donald Trump and get rid of him. And I think part of that, involves looking at the way our own identities have been colonized by the logic of branding. When I wrote No Logo almost 20 years ago, the idea of people being brands was still a very new idea. And now here we are, 2 decades later, with these incredible tools to constantly curate our own life, our own experiences, our tiniest moments for other people's consumption. We're broadcasting our own reality TV show of one all the time through social media. And so I think we should be aware of how that is limiting us, because brands are pretty narcissistic.
Well, thanks a lot, Naomi Klein, for answering us. And next Monday we will interview Noël that you might know already, which was a former deputy and mayor for the French Green Party. He was also known to have gathered more votes than any Green candidate during a presidential election. Mm-hmm. So what would be your question to him?
Mm-hmm. My question would be, do you believe that progressive European politicians are rising to their historical moment when it comes to the humanitarian crisis for refugees? And if not, why not?
Thank you.
Thank you.